Hi guys, my name is Stanley from valueinvestasia.com. We're gonna have a very special presentation for you today. It's gonna be a three-part series where we look at where are some of the best opportunity. If you're just starting out in investing, where are some of the best opportunity out there in Singapore, Malaysia, and in Greater China. Value Invest Asia, of course, is a financial media company. We started in 2017. And we started it with a very simple idea. Basically, when we are starting to invest, we realized that information about Asian stocks is very limited compared to if you're investing in the US stock market. Ideas and information about each company that you want to look at is plentiful. And we feel that Asia is gonna be a huge market in the future, and there's no reason why we should always be a second tier market compared to the US market. And that is why we wanted to produce some of the best and independent good research for you as an investor to understand more of the stock out there in Asia. Personally, I have been invested in the stock market for about 12 years, and I have worked my way both in the fund management and fund advisory side of the business in the financial industry. And we really wanted to create a platform and an ecosystem for investors to easily find information about companies. Value Invest Asia also produce an annual watch list to our readers and to our audience, where in 2017, after we released our report, we released 10 most watchlist stocks in the stock market in Asia, and within that year, our watchlist stock actually saw a return averaging about 32% as a whole for the year, and some of the best performing stocks actually more than doubled within that year. And because I'm an individual investor myself, I understand the struggle if you're just starting out in the stock market. Where should you really begin? And this is what we are trying to achieve in this three-part series, where we want to share with you, if you're just starting out, where are some of the key areas that you should be looking at. And today our topic is going to be why you should invest in S-REIT. I think in the Singapore stock market, especially if you're just starting out, the real estate investment trust sector is a really good way for you to get started, and that is the fact that Singapore real estate investment trust sector is a great instrument for you to build up your income portfolio. What is a real estate investment trust? A real estate investment trust is a simple investment vehicle where it allows small investors to be able to invest in huge iconic properties all across the region, and those that are listed in the Singapore Stock Exchange. You can think of it like buying a portion of a property and collecting the proportion rental from it as well. This is a great way because some of the properties is just too big for one buyer. Think of it, if you're going to buy the Marina Bay Financial Center, it's just too big for one buyer to be able to absorb the entire properties, and a REIT is a good way to repackage the properties and allows individual investors to gain some exposure to such an iconic property. So what are some of the REIT out there that you can invest? In the Singapore stock market, there's a retail REIT, where they're basically retail malls. Secondly, commercial REITs. These are mainly office towers that are rented out to many of the businesses in Singapore and across the region. Thirdly is industrial, where it can be separated into some of the logistic warehouses, maybe factories, even business park, science park, as you'll see later on in some of our example. And you will be able to access maybe hospitality REIT as well, owning a hotel through a REIT. Things like Escort REIT is one of the largest hospitality REIT out there in Singapore. And lastly, there's more and more type of asset coming out in the form of REIT or trust. One of the newest one is actually telecommunication infrastructure. Netlink Trust is one of the latest one that is able to harness infrastructure project into a REIT as well, or into a trust for you to invest in. So why is Singapore so perfect for REIT investing? That's because Singapore, being an island nation, is so easy to get around, and every location is almost just an MRT away. And so, if you're a REIT investor here, you can almost inspect your property in a daily basis. Think of it, if you're buying a house, you would definitely want to visit it first, take a look at it before you purchase. When you're investing a REIT, sometimes that's not feasible. But if you're investing in a Singapore REIT, a lot of time that is actually possible, and you can inspect your property on a daily basis to see how well the foot traffic is, how well the property is being maintained, what are some of the things that the property manager are improving on the property to improve its value, right? And Singapore, being a property focused market, has always been one of the best quality property industry in the region. They have some of the best and highest value property in the region, and over time, the managers in Singapore and in S-REIT has been very experienced in extracting very good yield from a property. So much so that S-REIT is actually some of the highest yielding trust instrument out there in the region. Singapore REIT can average roughly 6%, and you can find REITs that's averaging 7-8% in yield, compared to maybe REITs in Malaysia or even in Hong Kong, where they are mostly down in the 4-5% yield range. So today we're just gonna share with you, if you're just starting out, what are some of the REIT that you can really look at, maybe for your first investment. The first one that we want to talk about is actually Ascendas REIT. Ascendas REIT is now one of the largest REIT in Singapore. It is, of course, the largest industrial REIT in Singapore. It has a market cap roughly about 7.7 billion. And with such a large scale, it is still able to produce yield more than 6%. And its distribution per unit, which is its yield to the unit holders, has actually been increasing roughly about 5% for the past 10 years. So this is not just a REIT that after you buy, you collect a fixed rent on the properties, and this is a REIT that the manager has been actively in improving as well the yield for unit holders, and they have been successful in growing its distribution for its unit holders over the past 10 years. So if you have invested in the REIT 10 years ago, your yield on your costs might be more than 10% today, and it might still continue to improve in the future. The REIT has traditionally been mainly in Singapore, where it invested in many of the industrial properties in Singapore across a wide range, such as business parks, science park, high-spec industrial, even logistic and distribution center. These are its traditional type of asset in Singapore, but in recent years, it has also invested in Australia as well. And now 16% of its asset value is actually in Australia, mostly in logistic facilities. And that could continue to grow. And if the trust continue to acquire REIT in overseas, this could potentially become an international REIT, industrial REIT, all across the region. So Ascendas REIT has shown a great track record with high quality assets, and is definitely one of the REIT that you should be watching. Secondly is Popway Life REIT. This is a healthcare REIT, interestingly. It's a healthcare REIT where you're actually investing in hospitals, the property of the hospitals, and also nursing homes. It is a 1.7 billion REIT, and its distribution per unit has actually increased more than 5%. It's 7% for the past 10 years, from 2007 to 2017. Although the yield right now is relatively low compared to the rest of the REIT in Singapore, just a 4.7% yield for you. Most of its property is in Singapore, Japan, and just one hospital in Malaysia. It's more than 61% of its net property income is all coming from its three key properties in Singapore: the Gleneagle Hospital, the Mount Elizabeth Hospital, and the Popway East Hospital. So this REIT has proven that it is able to increase its distribution over time. And of course, it is also backed by a good, strong sponsor, the IHS Healthcare Group. So IHS Healthcare Group is one of the largest healthcare group in the world, and they have hospitals all over in India, Turkey, Malaysia, Singapore, and now going into Greater China as well. So if IHH decide to recycle some of its property into Parkway Life does have a good pipeline to slowly increase its property size and maybe its distribution as well in the future. And given that it is mainly a healthcare REIT, the stability of its rental is quite stable, and given that hospitals are very defensive businesses and they don't change tenant so often, and so it is able to create a very stable and growing REIT for the investors. And if you are interested in the healthcare space, Parkway Life REIT is definitely one you should be watching as well. The next one we're going to talk about is a very interesting REIT, is the Mapletree Commercial REIT. So this REIT has a mixture of property, both retail and also commercial. So it owns very high quality commercial and retail property along the Singapore West Coast Highway, right? And if you are familiar with the region, if you're familiar with Singapore, you know that across that area near the Sentosa Island, it's going to be a high quality asset. The REIT right now is a 4.5 billion REIT. It has a yield of 5.8%, and its distribution per unit has really increased since its listing in 2011. The distribution per unit has actually increased 10% a year since then. Of course, its crown jewel, many of you might be familiar with, is actually VivoCity. VivoCity today is one of the largest retail malls in Singapore, and it contributes more than 50% of the net property income to Mapletree Commercial Trust. Other property includes the Merrill Lynch Harbourfront, the PSA Building, Mapletree Anson, and Mapletree Business City 1. And importantly, Mapletree Commercial Trust is sponsored by Mapletree, which is considered GLC in the property sector. They have huge arsenal of property that could potentially again be injected into the REIT to help the REIT grow in the very, very long term. So this is not a REIT that you are able to just buy and just have a stagnant yield for the rest of your life. Even though that's good enough with 5.8% yield, there is a huge potential that this REIT can continuously improve and increase its yield and distribution over the long term. And the last one that we really want to introduce to you guys is CapitaLand Mall Trust. This is the largest retail REIT right now in Singapore with a 7.1 billion market cap. It's yielding around 5.6% yield, and it has one of the most diverse retail assets in Singapore. It owns property like Junction 8, Tampines Mall, IMM Building, Plaza Singapore, Bugis Junction, many of the heartland malls around Singapore, but also some of the key assets like Raffles City Singapore as well. So this REIT will give you a great exposure to the retail demand in Singapore. And in my opinion, CapitaLand Mall Trust is one of the best REIT manager out there in Singapore, and they are great property managers as well, being able to extract great value out from a property. Just look at what they have done with Bugis Plus. Bugis Plus was previously, before they got acquired by CapitaLand Mall Trust, it was an almost isolated mall, and once CapitaLand mall trust took over Bugis Plus, they are able to transform it and into a vibrant mall right now. They're gonna redo that for Funan as well, which is in renovation, and there's great plans for it, and that could be a good platform of how they're gonna use Funan to mitigate some of the online risks facing the retail malls as well, turning it into a more experience-based mall where it can attract more traffic of people hanging out in the mall rather than just spending money. Right, of course, investing in REIT is not risk-free. REIT, like any other instrument out there, has their risks in it, and some of the more inherent risks with the real estate investment trust is of course in the managers. So there's always a executional risk and the manager risk of, you have to invest in good managers able to take good care of your property, and not managers who are just making silly acquisition, trying to just build up the REIT so that they can get a much larger salary. All the 4 REITs that we talked about just now, we have not seen any evidence that the managers are making silly acquisition. Rather, they have been proven to be very good stewardship of the REITs and able to help us grow the distribution over time. So that's something that we really want to look at in the REIT. The second risk that we can think of for REITs is actually its debt. So when we buy a property, many times we will buy a property and have a mortgage of a long-term mortgage. You're going to talk about 20, 30, sometimes you can even find 40-year loan in your property. And that will match, the lifespan of your property with your loan. But in terms of REIT, many of them only have either a short-term or mid-term debt financing. So most of their debt is close to 3 years to 7 years maybe in debt financing, but they have to finance a property that's going to last for the next 50, 60 years. So what happened is they constantly having to find refinancing of their debt over and over again. Most of them tend to have to refinance a part of it every single year. And that is really a key issue because during good times, of course, the banks or finding bondholders is not that difficult. But when the time comes in a financial crisis, say back in 2008, a REIT could face a liquidity crunch and unable to find a debt to refinance. That's actually what happens to many of the malls, many of the REIT in Singapore. One example is CapitaLand Mall Trust, where it faced such a problem and it has to do a right issue in 2008, asking its investors for additional injection of cash to allow it to sustain the financial crisis. That is something to look out for, meaning that even if you invest in a REIT, sometimes when the financial crisis comes, you would have to be prepared to help out as well, to bail out the REIT as well. But the good thing is normally this right issue is going to happen at a very good discount. For those of you who might have invested in the rights issue of CapitaLand Mall Trust back in 2008, you would know that it is an extremely good deal, and you have, in fact, be able to even make a bigger gain through the rights. So if you're an income investor, and especially if you need some cash flow in your investment, which I highly encourage, even though for me, I might not need the cash coming in from my investment, I'm still considered an income investor because every time a dividend comes in, I have the rights to choose what I want to reinvest it in, rather than, when you're investing in a growth company, a lot of times you are just hoping that the company is going to do a good job in reinvesting their capital. Whereas if you're an income investor, you get to choose what you want to reinvest in. And the S-REIT is definitely one space that you should watch. And if you're just starting out, I really encourage you to get to know this sector. Even though if you're not a Singapore investor, if you're in Malaysia or anywhere in the region, I would still encourage you to look at S-REIT as well, given that we know that many of us prefer that the Singapore dollar is a much stable currency compared to the many currency in the region. And if we are able to invest in a currency that is more stable and yet give us a much bigger yield than what we can get in our home market, I think this is definitely one area that you should be watching at. I really hope that this presentation can help you gain more ideas on how to think about your investment if you're getting started. I know that the issue with being an investor out there is there's so much to read, and you do not know where to start, which company to start researching on, especially if you're just starting out on your own. And valueinvestasia.com is really here to not just provide you with the information, but we want to build a strong community as well who believe in value investing, who want to learn from each other and share knowledge with each other. So thank you for supporting us. And if you have any question about what we talk about today, just comment down below, and I'll try to answer each and every one of you as fast as possible. Leave a comment if you like it. Give me a thumbs up. If you think that this is of value, please share with your friends and anyone who might be interested in it. And stay tuned. In the next 2 days, stay tuned in your mailing list. We're gonna talk more about other stock market, like where to look at in the Malaysian stock market as well in the Greater China as a region. Next up, we're gonna talk about what to look for in Bursa Malaysia.